The beautiful Bharat Mandapam plays host to G20 leaders at the Leadership Summit. US President Joe Biden is already here. He has touched down and he will be making his way to 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. Ladies and gentlemen, Namaste, Jai Hind and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. It's a very special edition. Over the course of the next 60 minutes, the focus will be on India's moment in the sun. The rise and rise of Bharat via the G20 Leadership Summit. Will nations, the first world nations, help Bharat put together a consensus statement? Will there be a joint statement at the end of this two-day leadership summit that gets underway from Saturday around 8:30 a.m.? Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the thick of things along with his ministers. He will be meeting a lot of the leaders who are coming in on pull-asides and bilaterals. 3 bilaterals scheduled today itself with the Prime Minister of Mauritius, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and of course the one with the US President Joe Biden, who's here on his first visit to India. And in a short while from now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Joe Biden will be engaged in bilateral talks at the Prime Minister's residence of 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. It's a special gesture and perhaps to personalize this entire meet. And this is President Joe Biden just touching down a short while ago as he steps down. And we know the First Lady is down with COVID, so she has not made the trip. But there are plenty of promises. The two leaders will focus on fast-tracking promises that were made in that visit to June, as well as reviewing projects announced in Washington. We'll review progress on announcements of consulates in Ahmedabad and Bengaluru, as well as the mission in Seattle. Then, of course, fast-tracking the GE jet engines deal that was announced in June. Leaders are also likely to talk about enhancing collaboration between private sector and the space cooperation review, semiconductor deal, and are likely to sign the deal for construction of 6 nuclear reactors in India. The first one getting operational in Gujarat. That nuclear power plant is a big story to tell. Chandrayaan's success is a story that India would want to talk about. Collaboration with NASA is also going up. There was active help from all the space stations. The Artemis project will also be spoken about. There's plenty to talk about right now, ladies and gentlemen. That is a warm welcome that President Joe Biden gets. General V.K. Singh, appointed by the government. All the MOSs today somewhere seem to have been designated duties of welcoming the various state leaders as they come in. Abhishek Jha is with us. Let's get a quick update. Abhishek, whereabouts are you? The International Media Center is now thrown open. It's a hub of a lot of activity, but it's a vast space. How important is this bilateral ahead of the G20 summit? Can you hear me, Abhishek?
Of course, this is one of the most important bilateral that India was, looking forward to having President Biden during his presidency. This is the first time that President Biden has traveled to India. And also in the last 9 years of Prime Minister Modi, we have seen at least 3 US President traveling to India, from President Barack Obama to Donald Trump and now President Biden. So that also kind of tells the bipartisan support that India has in USA. And also in the last 3-4 months, we have seen this is going to be the 3rd bilateral meeting of Prime Minister Modi with the US President. They had met on the sidelines of G7 in Hiroshima. Then they met in USA when Prime Minister Modi was invited as a state guest in White House. And now President Biden is in Delhi, and as an exception, Prime Minister Modi is hosting him at his house. So that kind of tells the story that the bilateral relationship does have a reflection and does have an influence from the personal camaraderie that the two leaders share right now. Right. The deals that are most important right now is in critical and emerging technology that the two sides have been talking about, strategic dealings that the two sides will be talking about, and all the trade and semiconductor that you just mentioned. These are the important aspects where the two sides want to engage and develop a capacity to build more.
Abhishek, thanks for that. I think it's going to be a hectic next 48 hours for all of us here across the media fraternity, but especially here at CNN News 18 and the News 18 network, ladies and gentlemen, because this is Justin Trudeau. We've got just pictures coming through of Justin Trudeau, who's just arrived, touched down. So soon after the US President Joe Biden, you also have the Canadian Justin Trudeau touching down. Canada has for the moment frozen the FTA ties or put that held back on it. So will there be some progress there. There have been issues beyond the realm of trade. Geopolitical issues which India has constantly raised. Will that be addressed? His own pressures back home to stay on in power, and with those who are propping him up having secessionist tendencies towards India, plenty of questions arise. The last time around, Justin Trudeau was ridiculed for his behavior and the way he turned himself out, and also mixing with a lot of people who had secessionist intent. But we do see Union Minister of State Rajiv Chandrasekhar present there to welcome him. And as they welcome the leaders of across the world, it's time for me to say hello and welcome to Rahul Shivshankar here in our studios. Welcome aboard the News 18 network and this family, Rahul.
Lovely to see you, Anand. Lovely to see you, and thank you very much for having me on board. It's been a time of reflection over the last 2 months, and I'm also very thankful to a large number of viewers who have been asking when I'm going to be on air, and I can tell you that it will be very soon on this platform in some shape or form. It's such an exciting day today,
yes,
Anand, and I'm so glad to be back in the studio to talk about India's really bursting onto the scene as a leading global power, and it is actually leading the entire new narrative on reforming global governance. And I think fundamentally the conversation today that's going to follow between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi is a very important one, because remember, it's happening all in the backdrop,
Yes.
Anand, of two very interesting conversations that both leaders have had with President Xi of China. And both will want to know what exactly transpired in that conversation, because in all strategic establishments, there's always this apprehension that the Chinese will try and create a wedge where they can see one.
Correct.
And as you know, the Biden administration has been very, very forthcoming in trying to engage India in the hope that India will pivot against China. India, of course, pursues a strategy of strategic autonomy, where it doesn't want to be sucked into any one particular camp. And I think the challenge really is to get more and more influential nations, at least that's where the Americans are coming from, onto their side, so that they can build a lot of pressure.
What about Trudeau?
Trudeau, well, you know, he's an enigma actually. He's an enigma because he plays a game that India doesn't quite like, as you were mentioning.
Yeah.
The fact is that he is hamstrung. Jisko kehte hain coalition compulsions.
Yeah.
We are very familiar with it. We saw that during the UPA years.
Yeah.
And we can see those compulsions actually overshadowing his autonomy in his government to pursue a policy that might be actually much more reflective of goodwill towards India, but he can't beyond a point. So I don't think in the larger, to be very, very honest, I don't want to be condescending towards any nation, etc., etc. But in the larger rubric
Scheme of things,
and the largest scheme of things of international diplomacy, Trudeau knows his place. I think the three fundamental conversations that are going to actually determine the entire scope of this particular meeting are the ones that are being had right now as we speak between the Sherpas of the various engaging and contending countries on trying to arrive at that common language in that communique that we hope will be issued, because this will be one of the first G20s where if people hold on to the positions that they've so far held on to, there may not be a communique which will perhaps reflect on just how deeply polarized the world is.
Today. But something interesting, because G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant was in conversation with us at the G20 town hall, and he said that we are working from 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. to get every word is contested, but there is a common sense of compromise or consensus building. There is an effort to that. Jake Sullivan, the NSA of the US, also on that onboard press conference, mentioned the same thing, that there is a spirit of compromise despite our own positions and where we are in terms of a conflict-ridden world. Interesting.
Well, the countries that want to work within the global framework, like the Western Bloc, the G7 bloc, they might be more willing to concede ground. But two others, both their presidents haven't shown up.
Correct.
May not be so forthcoming. So that's the fundamental disjoint.
True, the president may not have come from China, but the premier is here. And if you look at Russia, we know why President Putin has skipped this. We know very well. But the most trusted aide is here, the foreign minister is here, and who does not hold back. So will India be able to bridge these nations and get a communique? That's important. But interestingly, the media center is quite the focus of action, not just action, but conversation. Xenia Kondratyeva, senior Russian journalist, is joining us from the International Media Center at Bharat Mandapam. So Xenia, namaste. Welcome to India.
Namaskar, thank you.
Let me first get a before I come to you for your own thoughts about what you feel about the arrangements. Let me also say hello to all our other guests who are with us. Thank you for your patience. Navdeep Suri, former Indian High Commissioner to Australia, is with us. Professor Peter Kuznick, Director, Nuclear Studies Institute, American University, is with us. Jennifer Zeng, member of the International Press Association and journalist, is with us. And we also have Professor Brahma Chalani, Strategic Affairs expert. So thank you very much for joining us on this very special broadcast. Quick word from Xenia, because she's right where all the action is about to begin at the Bharat Mandapam. Xenia, your thoughts about the arrangements? Did it surprise you? Are you happy? Are we taking care of you well?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have to laud India. I worked in India for 10 years before that, so I'm coming back home, I can say. But the kind of Delhi I have seen this time is something new even to me, So yeah, I think India has done really a great job. People debate at which cost, so something to reflect upon. There are always things that can be done in a better way, but I think everyone is impressed. And I think Indians themselves are impressed. They should be, and it's a very good, it's a very good, opportunity for the country. I think the leaders the officials today have spoken about it, that it was a huge exercise for the Indian government to arrange G20, both the physical part of it and of course the diplomatic part of it. A lot of efforts have been put in by Indian diplomats and the Prime Minister himself. And these exercises shared by all the citizens of the country. So I think what is happening over this weekend in New Delhi is actually a good boost for India and understanding where India is globally, because we literally see the global arena changing a lot.
As we speak, Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey is also touching down, and he's also arrived. So one by one, the premiers are all arriving. Let me quickly ask Navdeep Suriji, how easy or difficult is it going to be for us to navigate this tightrope amidst nations? Is the world deeply polarized, as Rahul was just mentioning, or is India going to be able to play the role of a bridge?
Look, Anand, I think the word is polarized. The war in Ukraine is a reality. The positions that have been taken by the European Union, the United States, China, and Russia are well known. I would just argue, perhaps from a different perspective. I think it's important to get a final outcome document. But if we don't get a final outcome document, that's not the end of the word, because there's a lot of other stuff that's happening. And there are certainly some areas for which we can already take credit, regardless of whatever outcome document emerges or the chairman's statement emerges from the summit. Getting the African Union to the table is going to be a big deal. It sends a very clear message to Africa that we've stood by them. We have used our presidency to strengthen our relations diplomatically with a bunch of different countries. Just look at the Arab world, somewhere that I've served a number of years, that you've got UAE, Egypt, Oman, and you're hosting Sheikh Mohammed bin Salman as a state guest after the visit. So it really does strengthen our ties with the Arab world, as just one example. There are all of the bilaterals that are going to be happening, but also on a completely different plane. I think we are getting acceptance for initiatives of India, like digital public infrastructure, a roadmap coming up perhaps from 24 to 26 to define how digital public infrastructure of the kind that India has created can become a template for financial inclusion and for the sustainable development goals. There's a lot else going on beyond Xi Jinping and Putin not coming. There's a lot going on beyond a joint statement or a final outcome document emerging. So I really think that over the next 36 hours, even as we keep our eye on the determined efforts of the negotiators burning the midnight oil, to come some language, and perhaps English language will give enough flexibility to arrive at some kind of a consensus. But for me, that's not the end of the thing. I think the successes are already being chalked up.
Yes, there are a lot of bilaterals, there are a lot of pull asides, there are a lot of mutual engagements that are there, agreements which will be signed. Like you said, the dimensions are far greater, but you always want to look at that which is not happening more than that which is happening. But Jennifer Zeng, if I may ask, what are the inconvenient truths that you are going to focus on?
I think we are really living in a very interesting era. I just saw your sign on the background, G20, the year of India's rise. I talked to myself, maybe we can add a small line behind or underneath that, which is the CCP's downfall. So it's very interesting. It's time. G20 was initially, I think, organized to show that the world-based largest countries' economies are working together to make a better world. But this year, Russia's President Putin and the Chinese CCP head Xi Jinping's absence tells about what kind of era we are living in this world. Of course, first of all, it's the Russia-Ukraine war, which makes Putin cannot attend this meeting. And secondly, why Xi Jinping skipped this meeting? That's a very, very big question to ask. For me, I think the most important reason is, of course, I believe it's the CCP's internal problems or difficulties or even crisis. China is now facing all sorts of crises from all fronts. I think Xi Jinping is too worried about leaving China, and so many people from the military staff to the high-level CCP, elders, CCP leaders, and to the general public. Everybody is becoming very angry about what Xi Jinping is doing to China. So he is very much concerned about his own personal safety if he leaves China. Of course, another big reason for him to be absent from this meeting is, I think, internally, he has already made a decision that, like what appeared to be a Twitter account of Xi Jinping's daughter said, and his pinned message said, give up the illusions, be prepared to fight, and we are in a high spirit. So that speaks of the CCP's major judgment about the global situation. They no longer believe they can have a good relationship with the US, with India, with the West. So a final showdown, you can say, between the CCP and the free world is inevitable. So under that kind of huge judgment, there is no much point for Xi Jinping to attend this G20 meeting anyway. So I think that's maybe the most two important reasons why Xi Jinping is not here when everybody else is.
You say that at a time, and I've got Professor Brahma Chalani and also Professor Peter Kuznick with us, but quickly, Rahul, I'll come back to you and then go across to the other two guests. There is a huge internal crisis. Some very senior voices within the CCP have actually criticized Xi Jinping, as per reports, for the way he's going about things. And they are quite literally down to the last yuan in their pockets, because China always boasted about the deep pockets. Is this true that they are going through an economic crisis? And like Jennifer Zeng said, rise of India, there should be a smaller one, says CCP's downfall. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's interesting because I'm just writing a piece which says the rise of India, the rise of Bharat, and the humbling of China. I was just working on it today. But look, while we can talk about the drawdown, economic drawdown in China, and its economy now is sputtering at about 3%, and there has been, because of nearshoring and friendshoring, a lot of money that is going out of the system that would have been predicated to China. I don't think the internal dynamics should be really over-amplified right now. I think fundamentally why Xi Jinping isn't here is because he believes that the order right now, the framework that of G20 and other groupings are not to his liking, because China has become isolated, given the fact that a large number of these groupings now are populated with a large number of allies of America. And he is giving priority to BRICS, to the SCO, to the BRI, which is going to be meeting very soon, right after this. As you know, almost 90 countries have pledged their participation in that. So he wants to upend the global order, not work within the framework that is already upholding this global order. He wants to break out of it so that platforms where China remains dominant can be actually the places that he wants to project power from. That's the real issue here at this moment. And obviously the other, and I think Mr. Brahmacharani will be able to explain this better, he also of course has a problem with India pushing through this very important grouping, the African Union. Because for a very long time, Xi Jinping and China has sought to project itself really as the voice of the global subaltern. And Modi has really stolen that show. We don't know if obviously the formal induction will take place at this particular summit. It could happen, many people are saying, in Brazil, but certainly one thinks that the joint communique will in principle open the doors for this, for G21.
G21, but it's also because of China's own actions. The economic predatory actions of China is the reason why African nations now are turning around and saying, and of course the West hegemony.
BRI reduces you to a client state. I think it's pretty clear now, and a large number of people are realizing that the way India has approached its power projection over the last 2-3 years, especially with COVID, etc., the vaccine Maitri, that India is looking to empower, not to dominate.
Not to dominate or weaken, correct?
Absolutely, or weaken. And Prime Minister Modi has a great deal of experience. He's done it here in India over the last 10 years, as you know, through the BJP's own I've sort of tried to suggest that they've been stewarded by Deen Dayal Upadhyay's own conception, which was, Antyodaya and of course, integral humanism.
Correct.
So that is what drives the Modi philosophy. India has lifted 400 million people out of poverty. And those that have been left out by the project of globalization are saying, wow, if this man can do it there, certainly by bringing out reform in our various fora, maybe he can use that reformed fora, revived fora to bring those benefits to the rest of the world.
The other aspect is that the nations can trust India. They can trust India with the fact that we are not there with an expansionist design or to weaken them. We are there to strengthen them and get them Kutumbakam. Yeah, that's not just a slogan or a nice sounding theme. We've walked that practice and we talked that practice because we've not been expansionist. Professor Brahmacharani and then Professor Peter Kuznick. Professor Brahmacharani, so should we focus and look beyond the absence of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping? Or will those two elements, those two nations and what they are part of actually be cast a shadow over the G20 Leadership Summit?
Well, there are two realities. The one reality is that the world has become increasingly divided. It has become increasingly divided not just because of the war in Ukraine. For example, the G20 has been facing a crisis long before the war in Ukraine began. But the war in Ukraine has only accentuated, it has widened the global divides. And clearly we have a new divide between China and Russia on one side and the Western Bloc on the other side. The G20 is an institution, an initiative dominated by the Western Bloc. By the Western Bloc, I mean not just the countries in Europe and North America, but also the allies like South Korea, Japan, and Australia. These countries together make up the majority of the member states of the G20. Xi Jinping likes to be the center of attention, whether it's the SCO summit or the BRICS summit. But it had he come to the G20 summit in New Delhi, he certainly wouldn't have been the center of attraction.
Yeah.
But of course, there's this wider issue, and Jennifer Zeng who did some plain speaking on why he's absent. But it's also important to keep in mind the fact that at a time when Chinese forces are massed along the India frontier, it would have been odd for Xi Jinping to come to New Delhi without making sincere efforts to diffuse the military confrontation, a confrontation that could escalate. It could actually lead to very serious bloody clashes or even to a limited war. And one really expected that in the run-up to the G20 summit, Xi Jinping's regime would make such an effort to diffuse the border standoff with India. But unfortunately, the message that Beijing has sent to India is that it does not believe in dialogue and diplomacy in resolving the crisis. It wants India to put up with China's land grabs of April 2020 and essentially stomach what China has done and pull back its forces from the frontier. So in other words, they're putting the ball in the court of the victim. They don't want to climb down from their perch and help diffuse what is an increasingly dangerous military standoff. But coming back to the G20 is at a crossroads. Its main mandate is to coordinate policy to make the global economy more robust, more sustainable. But because of the international divisions, the G20 finds it increasingly difficult to play its role as the premier institution in charge of the global economy. And therefore, in this setting, given the international divisiveness, the real value of any G20 summit lies not in the pious commitments that any joint communique might produce.
Right.
The value of a G20 summit lies in the fact that it serves as a venue for bilateral meetings between various heads of state or government.
Right.
That's the real value of the G20 summit. For example, Prime Minister Modi is going to have about 15 bilateral meetings with various world leaders.
Yeah.
Some other world leaders present in New Delhi are going to have even more bilateral meetings than Modi. But that's the real value of the G20 summit, because these interactions are what makes the G20 the premier institution in the world.
And if the Africa Union also becomes an integral part, this G20 size then balloons or swells up to more than 90 nations. If you were to take the European Union and the Africa Union and the individual nations who are part of this entire grouping. But more, like you said, the joint statement is perhaps an eventuality. What happens on the sidelines carries far greater meaning. Professor Peter Kuznick, thank you for your patience. Before I go across to Paul Fletcher, Shadow Minister in Australia, who should be joining us in a bit. Your thoughts, sir? Consensus over conflict, is that a possibility? And will the developing nations find more voice within the G20 grouping?
It doesn't look like there is going to be much hope for consensus at this meeting. I mean, the world is just so divided now. Modi is making a valiant effort to bring the world together, to assert India's leadership. And he's in a unique position to do so. Because on the one hand, he has not gone along with the sanctions against Russia or Ukraine. He's not sided with the United States against Russia. He's in a unique position. He's also positioned himself as the voice of the global South. And he's trying to represent the interests of the underdeveloped world at this meeting. So you look at what the United States is proposing. First of all, it wasn't even clear if Biden was going to be able to attend because his wife has COVID. But Biden is tested negative, so he's there. But he comes there with an agenda, and he wants to take advantage of the fact that Russian and Chinese leaders are absent. And he thinks that he can somehow pull this summit to support the U.S. position on Ukraine as well as the South China Sea.
Right.
But he's not going to be able to do that, even though Putin and Xi Jinping are absent. So Biden is also trying to challenge China with the United States' own massive development program against the Chinese Belt and Road program. But again, what the United States is offering is not a real alternative to what China's been offering. So I think what we're seeing is several dynamics here. And with the main one that I think is most important is the way Modi is asserting himself as the potential voice for leadership in the world at a time when nobody is really speaking for the planet. You've got Biden speaking for the United States and Xi Jinping speaking for China and Putin speaking for India. Modi trying to surpass that and bring things together. But the chance of doing so at such a divided conference right now are probably not great. On the one hand, we just had the BRICS Summit.
Yes.
And India was involved, then the expanded BRICS Summit. On the other hand, and much of the world is saying that the BRICS might represent the wave of the future. The U.S. counters that the G20 represents 85% of the global GDP, and the BRICS Plus only represents 36%. But in terms of the direction the world is going now, the momentum is not with the G20 and the G7 and the Europeans and the United States and NATO. Right. The momentum is a very different direction right now.
Well, I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just tweeted about President Biden, and we are given to understand, and I can hear, since it's an open studio, ladies and gentlemen, I can hear all the buzz around the input desk and the assignment that President Biden has just entered 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. So we're going to try and get you those pictures also and put that out. As President Biden, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that he's had productive deliberations with PM Sheikh Hasina and the progress in India-Bangladesh relations. He's also tweeted about his meeting with the Prime Minister of Mauritius, and he's also just now, I think, tweeted about President Joe Biden and welcoming him into India. Now, we'll see if we get those visuals of him entering 7 Lok Kalyan Marg, that update coming through. But quickly, Senior, I just want to understand, what is Russia's perspective here? What is Russia expecting? Because the foreign minister is going to be there. Russia will put up a very defiant pose. But is there going to be something significant that Russia will expect from India at the G20?
See, Russia has made its position quite clear that it considers, as much as India, that it considers G20 as a platform where regional conflicts are not to be discussed. They should be discussed at the UN. They have stated it many times, and I think India stated it as many times as Russia. Also, we can recall that last week, the Russian ambassador to India actually said, while he suggested that the Western, he didn't use that word, he said some countries have hijacked the agenda of G20, but we understand that he meant the Western countries, that G20 should focus on the economy, on financial issues, on debt, and so on and so on, and on climate. Which are the main things on the agenda. But he also noted one point which is very important, that things have moved on since the Bali summit, and a lot of things have happened within the
Senior, I'm interrupting
conflict.
you because I've just got pictures from PMO, and we're going to zoom into these pictures. This is Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcoming President Joe Biden at 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. These are the pictures of just ahead of the bilateral. PMO India tweeting these pictures, and we have these pictures of them sitting, the gentlemen, the two leaders sitting together. I'm just going to zoom these pictures. Very clear, comfortable body language, very relaxed between the two, leaning into each other. That's a sign of positive body language and equations. So clearly, these are the pictures. These are now not just the pictures. We've got the video also of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Joe Biden there. One important aspect, and I'd request Rahul and also Professor Brahmachalani to comment on this, is that this time around, while we are showing our technological prowess, our development, our economic prowess, there is a huge underlining of our Sanskriti and Sabhyata, our cultural prowess. In fact, the 28-foot Nataraja right at the entrance of Bharat Mandapam, the diyas and the lamps that are there at PMO, very clearly underlining that we are now going to be very, very clear and we're going to wear our culture proudly on our sleeves.
Well, I'll put it slightly differently. Yes, culture, of course, but culture represents civilization. I think India is going out there and telling the world that there is a third way. That we have civilizational values as represented by some of the slogans that have been used and some of the symbolism that you have directed our gaze to, Anand, to show that India can contribute where the other two systems, the Western system and perhaps even the Chinese system, has failed. We bring a bunch of values to the table that are steeped in an inclusive worldview, and that's from where we sort of take this conversation forward, because what is the one thing that is lacking in most of these bodies right now? It's a spirit of inclusion.
Inclusion.
Whether it's the United Nations Security Council, any pre-eminent decision-making body is not representing the world at large, especially the world in which at least a third of the population lives.
Yes.
And is going to be the future glide path to growth, or provide the future glide path to growth.
Yes.
So I think that civilizational value, that stamp, that look, we speak with an ethical background that goes back 2,500-3,000 years, is being actually represented via this. And look at this body language. This is the third or fourth meeting now in just the last 8 months.
Correct. And they look so comfortable. They say that when you have a traditional lamp that is lit, it is also because you pray that this diya or this lamp actually does away the darkness, dispels the darkness, dispels the doom and gloom, and also brings in light, brings in knowledge that's representative of knowledge. Shubham karoti kalyanam, that is what it says. Arogyam dhana sampada brahmachalani ji, shatru buddhi vinashaya deepa jyoti namustude. So that aspect is also important. And Prime Minister very clearly at the PMO extending the courtesy that was extended to him by the US President during his visit in June. Brahmachalani ji, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So it was to you, sir.
I think it's unusual for the Prime Minister to host someone at his residence. And this is a special gesture for Biden. The comfort level between the two, as you pointed out, Anand, is remarkable. When Modi was quite cozy with President Trump, and then Trump was defeated, a lot of questions were raised whether Biden will have a close rapport with Modi. But the fact is that the two have developed a close rapport from the very first year that Biden took office, from 2021. And the personal relationship, the personal equation between Modi and Biden has only grown. And the body language shows that. That's a good sign, because after all, inter-country relations are shaped not only by calculations, cold calculations of national interest, but also by personal chemistry between leaders. And that, so it's very important for leaders to feel very comfortable with each other, to trust each other, to be able to do business with each other. And I think Modi and Biden appear to be quite comfortable with each other. That's a very good sign. And also, I think the fact is that the ties between India and the US have warmed to such an extent that nobody's talking about how to bring the two countries closer together. The fact is that they're already quite close together.
Yes.
And this is quite remarkable given the fact that for 40 years, India faced American sanctions. From the early 1970s onwards, for 40 years, the US aided the rise of communist China while imposing technology sanctions on India. This policy changed only around 2005. So in a remarkably short period of time, US-India relationship
yeah.
completely transformed to the extent that as the joint statement, the long joint statement that was issued at the end of Modi's
State visit.
June visit, the state visit to Washington, that joint statement talked about making US and India very close partners of the 21st century. So that transformation of the US-India equation is astounding. Historians will notice how rapidly this relationship has blossomed.
I think there is a strategic reason for that also, even as I say namaste to Mary Milburn, who's with us. Mary ji, namaste. Thank you very much. Lovely to have you live with us. I want to understand and ask you, one earth, one family, one future is the theme. Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. Can this world think as one? Is it possible?
Well, thank you so much for having me this evening to you, and hello to all those on the panel. To answer your question, yes, the idea of one earth, one family, one future, it's a beautiful vision that speaks to our shared humanity. The gentleman who just spoke before me, namaste to you, is right. There's a beautiful relationship, an important relationship that the United States and India shares. And while the world is divided in many ways, I believe the vast majority of people desire peace, they desire prosperity, and a sustainable future for all. And I think with good faith efforts, open communication, and really just a willingness to understand different perspectives, consensus can really emerge. But it really requires patience and compassion and viewing others as fellow global citizens rather than adversaries. There will always be complex geopolitics at play, but if we focus on our common hopes and aspirations rather than our differences, that can help leaders find solutions. And that's the whole point of the gathering of world leaders here these next several days for the G20 Summit, is to find those common hopes, find those common aspirations so that we can make the world a better place together.
How is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, how much of credit would you want to give that? Because you've met him, you've seen him at close quarters, even at the June state visit.
Yes, the Prime Minister has shown strong leadership in bringing India to the global stage. It was such an honor to certainly perform for the Prime Minister and my country and India and during the Prime Minister's official arrival to the United States in June. But I tell you, the Prime Minister has shown strong leadership in really bringing India to the global stage. He's advanced India's development and really navigated complex debates over issues like trade and terrorism and technology. His initiatives, the government of India, the initiatives of Make in India and Digital India have really spurred economic growth. I hope that the Prime Minister certainly continues to pursue inclusive growth policies that really lift up the marginalized. I think that he has a personal understanding of that coming from his humble beginnings. But I hope that he continues to lift up the marginalized and demonstrate to the world that economic progress can coincide with social justice. I think that's a very important point. India has much to offer as a leader, emphasizing ethics and spirituality in economic development alongside technological advancement. So these next few years, the Prime Minister's role at the G20 really provides the opportunity to strengthen India's diplomatic ties and showcase its influence on the world stage. I'd say most of all, my thoughts about the PM and the leadership there, it's the PM's humility and his rise from very humble beginnings that really sets him apart from many world leaders. I understand now, with my intimacy certainly with India and the Indian communities across the world, I understand why India calls the PM a man of the people, because he truly is for the people, by the people, because he's one of the people. He has come from humble beginnings. He's certainly his own journey and track record has really proven to be the Indian dream. And so I believe that's why people call him a man of the people. And he should always keep that. If I were to encourage the Prime Minister, who I call a new friend, encourage him to keep that sentiment.
Well, let's hope he is hearing or this message does get across to him. But so far, he seems to be walking on the same path. But let me ask you, how easy or difficult is it going to be to get consensus at a time of conflict? Because India is friends with multiple nations who are at conflict with each other. Have you been in a situation like that? How easy or difficult is it to manage, to get things going? To get two people who don't see eye to eye on the table?
Well, conflict is always going to be present when you have different opinions and ways to approach. I think what's really important to understand that conflict always or often hinders development, and it spreads human suffering. And I think if that understanding comes to the table, then it's easier for world leaders to really sit down immediately and approach what can we do together to help all people. You see this conversation certainly going on with the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, how conflict hinders development and spreads human suffering. And there's always going to be different interests. With open minds, it should be possible to make progress on shared goals like economic growth and food security and energy security. But leaders have to be prepared to listen and engage respectfully and recognize the legitimacy of different viewpoints. It's okay to sit at the table and have different viewpoints. We just have to respect that and come to the table with an understanding that we want what's best for all people. And I just think that good faith right now is what's necessary. It's a negotiation tool and key. It's important to have that right now. I feel that coming from my position as an artist, I feel that cultural diplomacy can play a larger role right now as countries are working together. It can certainly play an important role here at the G20 Summit the next couple of days. Cultural diplomacy, it centers us on our shared commonalities and what we can achieve together. And so I think the way that culture has been magnified, certainly as the G20 Summit has started, I think those aspects can play a very large role in us understanding each other, coming to the table in the midst of differences.
See, I'm a fan and your voice is magic. So I'm going to request you to turn that magic on, please, here on the show tonight to encourage leaders to pick consensus over conflict, if I may, Mary.
Well, before I sing, I certainly want to say this, and thank you again for having me on. My challenge to the leaders of the G20 is just to focus on our common humanity. Seek to understand before asking to be understood. Let prudence guide our discussions, not pride. Let wisdom and compassion, care, especially for marginalized people and women, be at the forefront. I want to say too, there's a big conversation certainly happening the next couple of days, and that certainly is the African Union becoming a permanent member of the G20 Summit. And I think it's a great opportunity for the Prime Minister, for India, and for countries gathered to show that sense of humanity. The Prime Minister is right in this move to encourage the inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member in the G20, especially because Africa, if I can be candid, all of the G20 countries are benefiting from, their economies are thriving from trade and economic engagement from Africa. So it's only fair to have a continent at the table that truly serves the world. And so I hope that the G20 will move forward in including the African Union as a permanent member. But to end this segment with a song, one of my favorite songs that I think certainly speaks to inclusion and equality and how we can all come together to heal the world. It's a song that everybody knows. And the words say, heal the world, make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. There are people dying. If you care enough for the living, make a better place for you and for me. We have to heal the world together and make it a better place for everyone.
Absolutely, and a prayer for Michael Jackson too. But in this case, for you, Mary Bilben, what an amazing voice, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us live. I'm compelled to take a break, but sir, I have to go back quickly for one comment with Navdeep ji. Navdeep ji, India is at the throes of trying to bring together nations who are at conflict with each other. What do you think is going to be our biggest objective? Help nations connect with each other, take away something positive? Is that perhaps going to be the biggest takeaway for us or achievement for us? Sir, I can't hear you. You're on mute, sir. Please go ahead.
I think the biggest takeaway for us is going to be our ability to articulate the aspirations and concerns of the global south and to propose solutions that can actually be implemented with the resources from the developed countries. I think we're beginning to make a dent in that. It's a long road, but we've really made a start with that. So for me, the two takeaways: one is the impact that we can make in articulating the global south and actually coming up with solutions that we have developed and tried on scale in our own country. And the second is, I think, the very imaginative way in which the government has gone about with 200 events in 60 countries and really gotten the public to buy into the whole idea of G20. I think that's something unique and that's something remarkable, which I certainly haven't seen in any of the other G20s that have been hosted across the world.
Jennifer Zheng, the Chinese premier, has just touched down. Will he have much to say? And this is on a day when we've had the Chinese ambassador in Nepal trying to pit Nepal against India. So, how do we look at this?
Of course, we all know that China just released its new map, which it's included some of these controversy areas into China. The fact, I think, that they released this kind of map, which will surely be, I think, make the relationship worse with many countries, not only just India, again speaks to the fact that I think the internal politics in China is in chaos. The different departments are not coordinating very well. We all know that the foreign minister just disappeared into nowhere, and for months we still don't know what's the reason. And the latest rumor is the defense minister is also under investigation, and including the former defense minister. So in such of a chaotic time, to send the Chinese Premier Li Qiang to the G20, I think everybody understands he cannot make any decision on behalf of China. He is more like a secretary or even slave of Xi Jinping. So his presence there, I think, speaks to the shrink, like I said, downfall of the CCP, the fact itself. So I think the best takeaway of this for this summit is people, I hope, globally can really recognize more clearly the threat that the Chinese Communist Party is imposing to the entire world. If we can come into some common understanding on that and come up with a solution or a new insights of how to deal with this issue, that would be a great achievement.
Very well said. Final word, Rahul Shivshankar?
Yes, look, I just want to come back very quickly to the conversation that Modi and Biden are going to have. Look, let's be realistic also, Anand, that while, of course, the two countries are joined at the hip, metaphorically speaking, there are differences. And those differences, I'm glad, will be discussed. There is mutual suspicion that India's sort of strategic autonomy will lead it to play both sides. And I'm sure Biden has misgivings about India not taking a firm enough position against Russia. And of course, India has made its reasons very clear. So, as Brahmachalani was saying, this is a great opportunity for all world leaders to really talk to each other and perhaps exchange views, frankly, in these small bilateral private meetings. And surely this one that the Prime Minister is having with Biden will at least allow them to perhaps paper over some of those apprehensions. I think that's really very important. And remember, the reason we are getting a long rope is because we are performing as a nation.
Correct.
We're doing well as a nation. If we weren't, if our economy wasn't where it is, I'm sorry, we wouldn't have got half the respect.
Frankly, reality is, and as I say, thank you, Rahul. Good to have you on board. And thank you to all our guests. We're going to wind up on that note. We're taking a short break. When we come back, it's brass tacks, but the focus remains on the G20 Summit. 100 hours of non-stop coverage here on CNN News 18. Bye for now. Hello, welcome to this very, very special edition of Brass Tacks. It is the G20 moment as far as India is concerned. All eyes are on India and its ability to rise up to the moment. Leaders from 20 countries, the most powerful in the world, have started descending on New Delhi, the national capital, for the mega G20 Summit. And ahead of that D-Day, which is going to be Saturday and Sunday,